Hey there, welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Guy Jeans, and today I have a very talented human being with me by the name of Bernard Yin. He's an amazing guitar player. He's a fly fishing guide, loves to surf, loves the great outdoors, and just recently started doing some work with cow trout, and we're going to talk to him about that. Let me see if I can get him on the phone. Bernard.
Yes, Guy. Good morning.
Good morning. How you doing, bud?
I'm doing good. A little bit of everything, be it whatever, personal paperwork / bureaucracy to to checking the tides, to checking river levels, to waxing down my surfboard. So,
did you hear what Yvonne Chenard just did?
I did, and that's definitely a cool thing to discuss.
My gosh,
I am so blown away, and it's kind of, it's one of those things where you wish that other people beat him to it, just to say that there are other people who care, and he's trying, and I don't know if it's a perfect solution, but you got to start somewhere, and I think we've seen the way that company is managed. It always seems to be pointing into a direction of trying to make the world a better place,
Yeah, for sure. And you guys, your band, which we're going to talk about, aren't you guys playing there like on Saturday or sometime soon, or did you already play?
Yeah, you are correct. We are playing on Monday, the 19th. At the Ventura store, which is super cool because that's sort of ground zero Patagonia.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like a reception hang before a screening of a movie called The Physics of Longboarding. And
Nice.
The producer, director, I guess, the person behind it is a woman named Lauren Hill, who I've never known much about, but she's really involved with surfing and environmental things, kind of, blending it all together. So her film is a perfect fit for Patagonia. And I'm just super stoked. I love playing these things. It's a fun type of gig. I'd rather play gigs like these than sometimes the gigs that people associate more with being a glamorous musician,
Patagonia is such an amazing company, and I'll tell a quick little story real quick, but Yvonne was real instrumental in helping me get started in my guide business, and gave me a few pointers and stuff when I just was starting. And it was pretty awesome, he let me some waiters for my clients.
Cool.
Yeah, just an amazing company, along with a guy named Chipper, who's like the world Frisbee champion guy who was their reception. Ooh. But he was real instrumental in helping me get some waiters and stuff like that, and a few other people at the company. But what an amazing company. What are you guys going to do? You guys going to play a set there, or just kind of jam in the background?
Yeah, right. We are. You are correct. We're going to perform a set again right before the film, and it was
fun.
It came to us. It actually came to us through a guy named Josh, who was part of the team at Patagonia's shop in Santa Monica, and the Santa Monica shop has been really behind the band, and when he actually moved over to Ventura, and then they were starting to assemble this event, and so he threw our name in the hat. So that's how that came about. But yeah, it's fun too, because it's our music. When I'm creating and playing music, especially in the context of this band, Par AVION, it's I'm visualizing in my head. It's all about water. I'm thinking rivers and the ocean, and of course the tradition of surf music, which is a huge influence, is technically around revolving around water culture. It's the only, some people like to say it's the only genre of music created after a sport, which, it's kind of fun to say that. I don't really think that's the case. I think it was, we all know it was just young people who want,
Let's talk about that for a second. That was one of my questions since we're on your band, and I hope I pronounce it right, Par Avion, or do you guys?
We're closer than 99% of the people out there. So thank you so much. We're taking you to France.
So if you wouldn't mind letting people know, what does that mean?
Well, the literal translation is by plane, and it's inspired by the old airmail stickers that, if you sent a letter and you sent it via airmail, you'd have a sticker that said Par Avion. And they even issued, it was even called that, so to speak, stateside here in the United States. So if you went to the post office and said, I'm going to send something via airmail, sometimes the sticker or the stamp would actually say Par Avion. So it was sort of like this, this kind of universal catchphrase, meaning, you're sending something airmail instead of whatever, by land or by sea, I guess. It was just a fun word we wanted to, when we were kind of in the early days of the band, we were just thinking of something that was a little bit international, a little exotic, that maybe implied, implied travel, because we like to incorporate genres from different parts of the world and different influences. And so we're just, we're just trying to be a little worldly. Of course, that's, impossible because it's a big world with a million different types of music and stuff. But, we do what we can.
Yeah. And you guys are usually a 3-piece, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
It's nimble. In a perfect world, I would love to have other musicians participating.
Sure.
But logistically and time management, and we're not rich and famous enough to say, let's get the Tower of Power horn section and the like for this one gig at Joe's Bar.
Right. Well, what's going to be fun too is you guys are going to be playing at the California Fly Fishing Open October 8th, which is always a lot of fun, and my band is playing as well. So usually we'll hopefully get you up to play a song or two with us and jam, which would be a blast as usual.
I would be so into that. And I always get a chuckle when that topic comes up, because last time I did that, I think that one song lasted 2 hours.
Right. And we've jammed together down at the Carp Throwdown as well with Conway, and had a blast too. Just jamming, having fun.
Yeah, and thank you so much for. It's just so, you've helped nurture that Kern River world as an angling destination so brilliantly over last many years now. I've lost count of how long you've been, really just stimulating everything up there. And
thanks, man.
But I'm so entertained that you and I both, enjoy living in a world where, we put time into Mother Nature, but we also can't help but make some noise and act like idiots on stage.
That's for sure. So what makes surf music? I mean, why would it be called surf music? Is it the sound of the guitar? Is it the beat? Because it definitely has a distinct sound. And how does that all come about? How does that sound come about?
Right. Well, there are a few answers that sort of kind of overlap in a funny, the Venn diagram, where, the early days of what I think the purists would refer to as surf music was guys in the maybe early 60s in primarily Orange County and Inland Empire and Southern California, just playing instrumental bands with, where there's minimal or no vocals. And if I remember correctly, that was sometimes a byproduct of them just not having access to a PA, or none of them wanting to sing, but realizing that it was fun just to play music without vocals. And, at the time, there weren't like all these, a variety of pedals, and, the technology was still evolving. I mean, it's always evolving, and I think reverb was a sound that really seemed to appeal to these bands. And personally, I mean, I think it fills out the room if you're a small group, 3 or 4 people, and
Right.
and you're kind of stripped down. Add a little reverb, and it kind of thickens things up. I mean, I don't know if the motives were, Dick Dale likes to say, "Oh yeah, the reverb is like," or he used to say, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, "Oh yeah, the reverb reminds me of the sound of the surf, or the wash of the breaking wave and all that." And
Okay.
it's fun to think that, and you add a ton of reverb or echo to a certain guitar sound, and it does transport you, and so I think music is such a fun place to go for a certain high.
Absolutely.
The euphoria of listening to music or playing it. It doesn't really matter which. And reverb, I think, contributes to that. And so early surf music was that. And then I think British Invasion had an influence and generated stuff like Jan and Dean and the Beach Boys, where you still had that twangy reverb-filled guitar sound, but of course you suddenly had these, pop songs with harmonies and, singing about the lifestyle.
Right.
I don't like that kind of surf music as much because I'm kind of more of a visceral, rebellious sort, if you will, and all that stuff. It's so much of it is so bubblegum, even though it was full of innovations in its early days. But yeah, bragging about your car and bragging about your 10 girlfriends or whatever, it's not really that's not my mission as a musician, and surf music doesn't have to have all of that. And then maybe last but not least for now, there's this whole lifestyle element that's kind of come back into the picture, but that has nothing to do with those traditions of surf music. So you take Jack Johnson or
Right.
Donovan Frankenreiter, or even the Red Hot Chili Peppers or Sublime. Everybody loves. You go to a surf resort anywhere on planet Earth, and they're playing, Sublime and Bob Marley, and
Right.
Bob Marley was not super concerned about surf culture or the sandbars at C Street.
So when you
But
guys,
it's surf music.
yeah, when you guys are, when you're playing and your band is your wife, Rebecca, and then you guys have, I believe like different drummers, or do you guys have a steady drummer? Or I've seen you play with different drummers a few times.
Yeah, it's kind of a rotating, or what is it, revolving door, or musical chair. Musical chairs might be the best term. We pride ourselves on seeking out clever and inspired drummers, and it's not been intentional. We'd rather have somebody that
Sure.
that calls us randomly, in the morning one day and just says, "Oh my God, I have an hour free. Let's get together, and I want to work on this idea." I still live in this fantasy land where you get together with people and you make noise and something good happens. That does happen, but not as much as I would like it to. And we've yet to find the drummer who has that kind of availability, because one of the challenges is as you seek better and better players, they can be in demand from other bands, or as you get older as well, as I'm sure you've encountered. It's like, oh, well, my kid's got a baseball game, I can't make rehearsal. And it's like, I'm stoked for you, but my kid's got a new chord progression and a kick-ass rhythm, and I need a drummer.
So when you guys are playing, and your wife is playing the bass, and she's super great to watch, and as well as you guys, you perform, and the energy on stage is great. And when you guys are playing, are you guys playing like 1-4-5 type stuff, and then you're putting scales on top of that, or just playing riffs? I mean, how does the surf music work? Is it kind of like a set pattern that you guys are playing, or are all the songs completely different?
Right. That's a really interesting question. Are we sure that this is a fishing podcast?
It does. Well, my podcast is a little bit of everything. So
yeah, I like this.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Dude,
go for it.
Man, do you go Royal Wolf or do you do traditional Coachman, you idiot? You know? So funny. But, well, that's really a funny question because, and I'll explain in my answer. For sure, the more basic, like traditional rock and roll chord progressions, 1-4-5, which every other surf band, even the vocal bands like the Beach Boys, stole from, let's say, Chuck Berry. However that's interpreted, creates a great foundation, and we have a lot of songs that sort of work off of that foundation. But but we like to push it in other directions where either we deviate into slightly more exotic chord progressions, and because I'm not as evolved as I'd like to be with my chord vocabulary, for example, quality, let's say, Brazilian jazz interpretations for me are something that I just marvel at, but I rarely, I don't sit down for 2 hours a day, trying to nurture that side of who I am. I wouldn't mind, and it's one of my favorite genres of music, but where I go is, since the guitar is often carrying the primary melody, I certainly enjoy deviating melodically or with my scales. So you have a major 1-4-5 chord progression, and then you have a few really predictable ways to build off of that with the pentatonic scale or a relative minor or just the major scale within that scale. But I go beyond that with the help of deviant and sometimes ugly passing tones, meaning notes that don't belong within that key, but that I throw in real quickly to sort of change things up. The beauty of the electric guitar, of course, and you on the keyboard with the pitch wheel, is to bend the notes, and that's subtle, but it's really cool. Recently, we've been exploring a few like almost Hawaiian type tunes where I'm playing the lap steel.
Oh, cool!
And there's a certain part of the song where everybody knows that slide guitar or steel guitar, you can go between two notes, but you've got this huge sweep that the slide takes between the two notes. And I actually, on one of the tunes, I'm building in sort of a run where I'm finger picking as the slide goes between these two notes, but it's literally like, over the course of 8 beats, it takes me 8 beats to go between two notes that are only like, I don't know, 4 or 5 notes apart. So there are deviant tones within that make absolutely no sense. But of course, it's a slide, so it's really psychedelic and it's evocative and trippy, and it doesn't sound like I'm playing anything wrong, even though I technically, if you want to look at it scientifically, I'm playing it. I'm very wrong.
So you're doing a lot of improvisation as you're playing up there on stage, it sounds like, as well, huh?
Yeah, a lot more.
Cool.
It's been on the increase to the point where, the framework of the song gets established. We make sure the drummer understands it.
Yeah. How fun for you, huh?
Yeah, it
oh my God.
makes it really interesting, and that's why I'm usually, I'm not always looking cool with, a poker face, and I'm more most of the time just have sort of a shit-eating grin and just laughing my ass off because it's like, oh, that was a stupid gamble. Why did you try that note? Or and so I'm constantly trying to mess with my own head just to keep not because I know that energy of that spontaneity is translating to the crowd.
Yeah.
So and it makes it more fun for me. I'll be the first to admit. So.
And it sounds,
boy, that's the short answer to your question, because
that's
I
cool.
could keep going.
I get it. It's awesome. I like that. My next question was, it sounds like from reading information about you is that you guys are actually doing some songwriting as well and doing stuff like that. Are you doing, is that correct?
Yeah, you are correct. And the majority of our shows, we play minimum 50% original music.
Oh, right on. Very cool.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't realize that because we try and make and I'm second guessing here, but we try and make our original music so engaging that people are just like, oh man, that was so cool. What was that? And it's like, oh, well, that was an original. And it's like, and actually, it's really funny, but I try to live life without too many anxieties and sources of stress. But we've been asked to play a wedding, and and we were asked because we played a party for the couple when they got engaged, and we played 80% original tunes. And it's like, now you want us to play for 100 of your friends and family and relatives, and I think, are they going to want to hear, Footloose,
right.
Shout? It's like I'm starting to bite my nails. Like, how do we make a live music set of ours, sweet for a group of people that really all just need to be pleased, and I want to do. I appreciate the mission. It's like I like being a stubborn, creative person, but I think the reward of having a good time and sharing smiles with people, I think, is far more important.
Are you guys? Is that what you're doing full time now? You're not guiding anymore, are you? Or are you?
No, I haven't guided in a long time, and the right now the only income that Rebecca and I have is through music, and that's been that way for a few years.
Awesome, man! Congrats. That's not easy to do.
It's definitely not easy to do, and I think it's important to add to the conversation that the only thing that has made it sort of feasible is we just try our best to keep our overhead down. Otherwise, otherwise it wouldn't be possible. I mean, I know what, we're Santa Monica based, and, and I got lucky years ago with a little rent controlled shoebox apartment here. Otherwise, I wouldn't be living here. And I mean, I know what the cost of living is for most people, and it's tough making ends meet. Unless you have a really hardcore, serious, proper career job with salary and all that. And I respect all that. It's just not who I am.
Yeah. I get it. And are you touring with other bands too, kind of on the side?
Yeah, I've reduced my, how high I put my hand in the air for that type of opportunity because because a few things have been happening. One is the request for Par Avion to play has gone up a bunch, and the amount of requests in the last few months, and so that's desirable because this band is a better representation of what I like to do as a musician than these hired gun gigs. The hired gun gigs can be really cool because of the travel and the exotic locations or big shows and stuff like that. But
cool.
Comes a time when you need to respond to what's in your heart.
Hey, are they still doing those big concerts down there on the Santa Monica Pier?
They haven't done anything for quite a while. I even think, I think the pandemic was one of the curveballs, but also a few years ago, they were throwing a few shows that got too large, and the city and the police department, they realized that if anything went wrong at this event, they would have been over their heads.
Dude, I went down there and I saw Jimmy Cliff play on the pier. And
And I missed that show, and that probably had 8,000 people or something.
It was insane. It was unbelievable. As far as you could see on the beach, looking south, and then the whole entire pier was completely full, and it was just it was amazing show. But I couldn't believe what I was blown away was like how many people were actually on the beach listening.
Right,
as far as you could see. It blew my mind.
Yeah, and as the years have gone on, to their credit, meaning the people,
Yeah.
The number of people who, whenever they had these events, the number of people who would opt to just like have picnics and parties with their friends down on the sand really increased, and I thought that was super cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't remember there being any major incident, at least that I know of. Back to my previous comment about my shoebox apartment, I live really near the pier, so
Yeah.
I can open my window and hear the music and decide whether I want to run out there and watch the band.
Right.
And and also I can hide when I just get sick of the humanity. But it's a lot of people on the sand, and a cool history of diverse artists, and it was a good thing. And I think the last thing they tried doing was they brought in another promotional group. It wasn't done in-house, and they started to focus after these incidents where there were too many people. They scaled it back to where it was more like indie, lesser-known artists and local artists. But this year I haven't heard of anything cooking.
Yeah, that was fun. That was super fun. So that's my segue into the beach, since you live basically on the beach. How's the Corbina been this year down there in your zone?
This year it's almost like every few years I have a year where I'm just striking out, and I've had hookups, I've had numerous fish to hand that were foul hooked, like they're I'm casting into a pod of fish that are visible. I'm not stripping my fly aggressively, and I still manage to foul hook one. I think they feel the tickle of the hook, and then they bolt, and when they bolt, they accidentally hook themselves. And I always feel so dirty, but this year's been my worst year, so it's funny. And I started a little late. I was a little bit too busy, and I was out of town a lot when they were at their prime. But I'm not saying that to make any excuses. But timing is certainly a huge part of the game. And
sure.
earlier in the season, they seem to be a little quicker to bite. But they're so entertaining,
Were you seeing a lot down there? Were you seeing a bunch that hanging out, cruising around?
It varies, but it's consistent. In the sense that there's a certain time frame in the summer when you can go out there even at the wrong tide and scare up a few by wading through the shallows, or just walk on dry sand and look for the telltale, wakes, or see a back sticking out of the water or something like that. But one thing I did see this year, which I haven't seen in a while, were a few of these classic pods where it's like, oh, I just lined a fish, it just bolted, and when it bolted, it scared 15 other fish.
Yeah.
And that used to happen a lot more, and so seeing that happen this year was kind of cool. It didn't happen a lot, but it was encouraging.
That's cool. So you were in Northern California, it sounds like, for a while, and I think you were working at Creative Sports.
Correct, and it's so funny because the way you say all that, it's like, oh yeah, well, I quit a year ago or whatever. But we're talking when I was like 12 to 14,
No way.
And like Andre Pouillon said before, I'm going to put you to work, but you got to go to the State Board of Equalization and get a permit to work as a minor. Your parents have to sign, all this stuff, all of these formalities.
Oh, that's cool.
It was really cool. And I and three or four other kids, varying from, early teens to like mid to late teens, were working in like one of the offices or one of the back rooms doing basically, shit work for, like packing packing Ziploc bags with dubbing material, or wrapping chenille onto cardboard cards and stuffing them into bags and stapling the tops to them. And it was, but it was fun. We would listen to the radio, and we would just hang out and talk fly fishing all day long, which was, to be amongst other young people, meaning, again, like, let's just call it early to mid-teens, who are obsessed with fly fishing and fly tying, was kind of, it's just, I don't think it's easy to find if you're a kid.
For sure.
Like, where can you just go, oh, I'm gonna spend Saturday afternoon tying flies with my buddies, and I'm 13 years old. I just don't hear that very often from anybody with kids.
So were you fishing as a little kid up there? Was it like the Truckee and in that
so
zone?
What happened was I discovered that I could drag I was already like captivated by fishing in general, and whatever, I'd throw 11 years old throwing salmon eggs into a stocked section of Lake Tahoe or something while on summer vacation, and that was paradise. But shortly after that, again, maybe my early teens at the latest, I had a funny moment where I was this is a good story. I was on a vacation with my mother visiting friends of hers in Quebec, and I was fishing for yellow perch with live crickets under a bobber, and a northern pike took my bobber and cut the line. And then the bobber came like floating up to the surface a little later, and I retrieved my rig. But I was trying to figure out how can I fool this fish? So I went back to the cabin, and they had like a little tool shed, and I put together a little improvised mouse fly lure using a cork, like a wine cork. And I went back the next day, and I had no luck whatsoever. But I was inspired, And when we got back home, and I was living in Walnut Creek, I always remember we drove by this shop, and it had this huge sign on it, like the size of like a garage door, and it said "fly fishing only." It was pretty obnoxious, It's like, don't even come here unless you're going to talk fly fishing. And I said, and I thought to myself, well, fly fishing, isn't there something called fly tying, which I kind of had a familiarity with? So I got to check this out. And I walked in there, and Andre was there, and immediately he just, sat me down at the vise and showed me a bunch of flies, tied an AP nymph in front of me, tied the classic, he had this loop wing pattern that was kind of fun, sort of an interpretation using a loop instead of a tuft of, let's say, mallard flank on like a traditional dry, like a Cahill or something. And anyway, after 20 minutes of this, I was just so sold. It's like, I can be creative and still think fishing at the same time, and so I my relationship with the shop developed there, and then of course it's like, look, I've got, how can I be more involved? And so Andre was always cooking stuff up, and he had a whole group of the young people that were part of the Diablo Valley Fly Fishing Club's youth program. That I think for a long time, the Diablo Valley Club was always the dominant force with fly tying competitions for the kids.
Okay.
At the Conclave, which was in West Yellowstone at the time. I'm not sure if that still exists or where it is now, but so I was one of the competitors actually I think in 78 or 79, and
no way.
Three of us from Diablo Valley were first, second, and third place. And the guy who took first was a killer. He was the kind of guy where it's like, man, if I could be as good as you, but I'm not ready to sacrifice the time. and then maybe, and it's like with music, that maybe he had the aptitude too, because we all know that he just had a knack for, he could tie the most perfect anything that you wanted. And he was like 13. And but I was also in paradise, because here we are in West Yellowstone for like 3 or 4 days, and every other hotshot fly fisherman and woman on planet Earth is hanging out,
Yeah.
and they're all sneaking off to go fishing.
Yeah.
So, and as competitors, you could just submit your flies at any time over like the course of 2 or 3 days. So it's like, oh, I'll tie my Adams this afternoon, and I'm going to go, hit the Madison. And so it's just a funny story of just being distracted by wanting to fish instead of become a master fly tyer. And we all know that a crappy looking fly can do the job.
Sure. What's so cool about your story is, it says a lot about Andy, or Andre, or is that?
Yeah, Andre.
Yeah. And he, just bringing you in and sitting you down and doing that, and just doing that and being able to inspire a kid, and then, look at you look at how much you're guiding or teaching other people how to tie flies or passing on the sport,
right.
Is pretty darn incredible, And,
I agree. Yeah, he helped steer me in a reasonably good path, because of his kindness and his generosity. There's no question about it. And that's one of the beautiful things about the sport in general, is that I still find so many people in the sport that are just such good souls. And Rebecca, who's really fallen in love with fly fishing, I think a lot of her stoke for the sport has been, what would you say, facilitated, or she's benefited from meeting all of these good people that are, that are just like, oh, well, here's an extra, 2 or 3 flies, since I see that you guys are running out on these. Rebecca, try one of these, or, she has these interactions with the fly fishing community in general that are so positive that it's actually been good for our relationship.
Oh, absolutely. So, let's talk about your deal that you got going on with Cal Trout.
Oh yeah, well, it kind of started with, I think the real catalyst was Mikey Weir not always being able to be in the field in Southern California to get to document certain areas that were important to Cal Trout's agenda. So the most obvious ones and the ones that I participated in the most are the dams at Ringe in Malibu on Malibu Creek, and Matilahaw on Matilahaw Creek, of course, right there adjacent and tributary to the Ventura River. And so a lot of the quote-unquote work has been really simply just like running up to these locations and getting some footage and key photographs that might be of use to all of the sort of the lobbying and the advocacy that Cal Trout is doing in a way that honestly is just, to me, it's like, it's intimidating to even visualize the amount of work that their core team is capable of doing. And currently they are really, what would you say, picking up the pace, or have made great strides, that might be the best way to phrase it, in the dismantling of some of the dams in California, some of them being derelict, like the ones on Matilahaw Creek or Malibu Creek, where they don't function at all, and they're 100% full of silt. There's no water retention. They serve zero purpose. They're not even deep enough up above them to be swimming holes anymore. People, would sometimes use the pool above as a swimming hole. You can't even do that. But I've always, for years, even prior to the Mikey Weir thing, I've always been a little bit of a loudmouth, trying to talk to people at different organizations, be it NOAA, Cal Trout, Trout Unlimited, Department of Fish and Wildlife. It's like, hey, wait a minute, we need to fix the regulations on Creek XYZ, because I just went hiking there and it's full of trout, and I went hiking there the next week and it was full of, styrofoam worm buckets, and all the trout were gone. And you're not planning there. These are wild fish or whatever, So I mean, in my sort of layman's amateurish kind of way, it was just sort of like just getting up on a soapbox all the time about trout issues. So to do anything where I can contribute to an organization who's really got it together, and I don't have the experience as an advocate in the way that some of their team does. I'm not an attorney and all that stuff. It's been beautiful. And then more recently, it's been stepped up where I think they recognize the outdoor activities that Rebecca and I love to do, especially in Southern California, is something that helps tell a good story. And so we've been woven in as we did a social media takeover for them, and we've
what does that mean?
We've gotten a lot. We've gotten a lot more involved.
You guys are taking care of all their social media?
No, we did we were invited to spend a week making roughly it was like a once a day to make a post on their social media that was sort of, at the end of the day, we kind of created a series of anecdotal images that kind of told the story of the plight of Southern California trout populations, of course, with an emphasis on the wild and native, stashes, for lack of a better word, it's like, that tiny little creek up there, those fish are actually 99% still pure steelhead, even though they're 30 miles inland and all that. But, but coloring it up like, well, here's a hole where you can see a trout, and then here's that same hole a month later, and it's got carp and largemouth bass because the water warmed up and the trout moved away and the other fish moved in, and so a variety of little posts like that to, I guess, add some color and interest to their to the face of Cal trout, and to better illustrate how they're approaching everything. It was a lot of fun. It was a good experience for us, and Cal trout was actually quite pleased because there was an increase in their social media engagement, and so everybody looks for that.
Oh, for sure. Awesome. And you were doing some like drone stuff, or were you? Right.
Yeah. And some of the footage I got off the dams, like Matilaha and Ringe, was using a drone. And I'm an amateur drone pilot, but boy, drones are super fun.
They're awesome, huh?
They're so fun. I got a little bit of drone footage also up at Rush Creek, which is super cool because, we all know how beautiful and interesting that landscape is in the Eastern Sierra. And just to fly a drone, even like, whatever, like a quarter of a mile, 30 feet off the ground, and then just look back at the footage. It's just so cool. I mean, and it's whatever. It's not like I'm at the Grand Canyon, or it's just fun and interesting. And of course, it's luckily I can every now and then I can apply it to something helpful. And I mentioned Rush Creek because Cal trout is actually involved up there as well.
Are they?
Yeah, I believe with flow management, I think that was the primary fix that watershed needed.
Okay. I don't know if Cal trout. Have you heard of them being involved in the meadows? Some of the meadows in the Southern Sierra. Have you heard anything going on with that?
Actually, I believe the answer is yes, but I'm not sure about recently. But I do know that they have been, I would say, increasing the number of missions or fights or whatever you want to call it, agendas. And I'm not looking at their website right now, but it's pretty intimidating because if you go to their website, you can look at the catalog of all of the watersheds that they are taking some sort of action in, if you will.
That's awesome.
I mean, it's interesting you bring that up too, because now we can really this is really like rolling up our sleeves and talking about trout in California. But one of our posts that Rebecca and I made on Cal Trout's Instagram page got a response from somebody. It was of a brown trout, and it was and it's like brown trout are not native to California, but here they are, and I forgot how we phrased it, but somebody chimed in and said, "Well, what do you guys do? Are you guys doing anything about the brown trout in the Trinity River?" Or it was something like that, and it was hard not to think that there was a little bit of attitude.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody else was also saying, "Oh, and what about the trout in the East Fork San Gabriel River?" And these were things that I can say with reasonable confidence we're not high on Cal Trout's agenda, because they can't address every single trout riddle or challenge in the state, and we have to. It took me a long time to take that into consideration. Back to my earlier comment about finding trout in certain parts of Southern California and realizing that they're not being really paid much attention to, but also coming to the conclusion that, well, maybe it's better to save the steelhead in Malibu Creek than this particular population, up in this funky corner of the San Bernardinos or something like that.
Right.
So, what's the saying?
What's interesting?
Choose your battles.
It's been going on. I've had my shop for 20 years now, and
wow,
I know, isn't that crazy? And what's crazy is the Kern River Rainbow Project and the golden trout and the little Kern golden trout, the ones that we have here, the whole thing going on with the Kern River Rainbow. And, they just recently shut down the hatchery where they were going to bring native Kern River rainbows from way up in the high country and put them in the hatchery. But now that's been put on hold. But
I'm so sorry to hear that. I thought that was such a cool,
right.
A cool piece of progress on,
and it's so there's a whole bunch of drama going on right now politically with all that. So, it's in the 20 years that I've been here, and I've seen, progress, and then progress gets smashed, and then, here we go, we're getting new hatchery, and they actually start building it and doing all that, and then all of a sudden that shuts down. And so I don't know, man. It's just kind of a bummer. But I'm always hopeful that it'll get back up and running. Hopefully, we'll see.
Oh man, yeah. And actually, I'm now kind of multitasking, and I'm looking at the Cal Trout website, and there is a section addressing the Kern River Rainbow, but I'm not sure if I'm having trouble seeing whether or not it actually cites a particular action in progress. But Cal Trout definitely recognizes the Kern River Rainbow.
Yeah.
And I'm thoroughly fascinated by that watershed where you live, because the evolution of the golden trout and the Kern River Rainbow as well, as best as I understand, is the result of an unusual amount of isolation that those trout had from other trout populations in California because of how far south you guys are. That drainage is in the quote unquote San Joaquin system. I mean, you can it's and that allegedly there was a time when I believe it was Tule Lake served as sort of a massive inland lake, served as sort of an intermediary sea that once every now and then during unusually wet years could have connected to the San Joaquin River and could have allowed for an exchange of genetics, but a lot of the time the genetics were isolated, and those, especially those golden, they just sort of got stuck way up there and just got colorful and did their thing.
It's an interesting story for sure. And it's it's a big process. I was involved in getting some of the samples of the Kern River Rainbow way back when, and we fished up the river pretty far, and then got way back up into the Golden Trout Wilderness and into the national park. And now some other people are finding some of the Kern River Rainbow in other areas that are supposedly pure strain, up in Big Arroyo Creek, way up you're starting to get up towards the headwaters of the Kings, flowing in on the other side, and,
Oh, right. So is that Sequoia?
yeah. And, it's interesting. All
love it.
I know it's all connected, and I know you've spent some time on the Kings too, which is another amazing place, right?
Totally.
And
that conversation ends right there.
I know. I wanted to ask you, one of my other questions I wanted to ask you was, do you miss guiding?
I get asked that now and then, and the answer is I miss certain moments. The work that guides have to put in is just incredible, and I know that the type of guiding and the locations I was guiding brought their own challenges. It wasn't like a 5-mile drive down the road with a riverboat and a drift. It was different. But the moments I missed were kids. When you worked with kids that were enthusiastic and the fishing was half decent, it was nothing but a riot because they've got tons of energy. They're willing to, you can coach them most of the time into being patient and persistent. I always say that some of the funniest moments where, you deal with a kid that's like, tiny, like whatever, 3.5, 4 feet tall. And you see a fish holding on the other side of a boulder that's like, it's not very big. It's like the size of a beach ball. And you just say, just sneak up behind that boulder. I'll be right behind you, and just drift your fly on the other side of the boulder, and because they're so short, they can sneak up, and they love, a lot of, children love a challenge, or at least the many that I dealt with, and it's like, I get to sneak up on this fish. This is going to be exciting, and so moments like those were great. But yeah, the work and the time, and it's just, I have so much admiration for people who guide and we all know that most of the guides that you see sort of like puffing their chests, and I mean that in a good way, or that you see on videos and stuff, they're young, and it's important to have that stamina and energy. So,
for sure. Absolutely.
But I think if you have the opportunity to introduce people to the sport in a favorable light, I think you're doing a good deed.
Yes.
But you've guided 1,000 times more than I have, and you know how much work it is.
One of the things that over the years, with the different fires and that we have here, and smoky conditions, bad water conditions, hot water, hot river temperature, stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's forced me over the years to seek out other species, and start guiding for all these other different species, and I really enjoy that part of being a guide and an instructor is seeking out these other types of fish that not a lot of people would normally fish for, and trying to sell that to them.
No, yeah, and I applaud you so much for that. And one of my favorite things that you post is the footage of your like tubing for bass.
We gotta go do that.
The warmer sections of the Kern. Yeah, and and I get it. I enjoy largemouth and smallmouth bass fishing big time. I mean, I was really into that as a kid. I was tying crawdad flies and deer hair poppers when I was getting into fly fishing, and I was going to local ponds up in Northern California and fly fishing for largemouth and loving it. And I really applaud you. And I had mentioned, I think in an email to you, that some of the topics we can touch upon were, and then I mentioned, I think, carp.
Yeah, that was my next topic.
it's like, what, and again, it might be an age thing, or I don't know, maybe I'm just spent too much time just walking the beach and meditating on life. But to me, I sometimes think of fishing as prone to a certain type of bias that it's almost like racism. I mean, I'm being very extreme by using that word, but it's like it's like, there's those people that they'll catch a carp and they'll immediately throw it on the bank. I mean, sure, the carp doesn't belong in, isn't it as an introduced species and all that, but you're not going to just throw a brown trout up on the bank.
Right.
So, what's going on inside of our heads that makes one fish, quote unquote, more important or superior to the other? And so I've really tried to be like a little bit more conscientious. I'm on a trout stream and I see a school of chubs go by, and it's not like, oh, damn, I wish those were baby trout, but it's more like, well, those chubs are actually native to this river. So, they're important, and the big trout's probably going to eat a few of those to stay healthy. And, but yeah, the carp thing up at Isabella, I've only done it. I've only done it once.
Yeah. Well, you came up with your partner, Lino, and won the dang thing.
Yeah, and that was really spontaneous. He literally told me the night before or something
Oh,
like,
no
you know
way.
what? Yeah, he said, you didn't know that? He said, my partner is going to back out or has a change of plans. I forgot what the story was. I think maybe his partner ended up going with another partner, but it's like, I've got, I need a teammate for tomorrow's thing. You want to do it? And I was thinking, well, Lino is such a kick-ass angler that I can just go and eat a sandwich and take a nap, and we'll probably still win. And my original goal was to attend and actually do drone footage because.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Because
that.
The wind was calm. Those trout are congregating, those carp are congregating in the shallows. And it's a really cool visual.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, purely from a visual perspective, it's totally a riot. And I plan to go up next year.
Oh, awesome.
Hopefully, maybe even a day early, so I can just do the footage.
Yeah.
But
so let's talk.
But I enjoy the carp because I mean, like many, I've found that it fights hard, and sometimes it doesn't want to eat, and and we anglers love to torture ourselves, right? Whenever it's like the Corbina thing, it's like, this is stupid. I've cast right in front of these fish 1,000 times, and I've gotten one take, and it's like, this is supposed to be the lowly carp, the inferior fish, and here it is telling me to take a hike.
Yeah. So tell me, how did you guys go about your, like fly wise and stuff, like when you were at Isabella, at the Carp Fest,
finally someone asked, and I spoke with Chalky when that whole event was wrapping up, and I said, when we were at Carp Throwdown, sometimes we would like press somebody to like discuss technique or like what part of the lake is better. Don't we want to come out of this? Yeah, we want to come out of this away from this experience with a little bit more than
absolutely,
the food in our tummies and our raffle prizes.
Absolutely.
And so what was funny about Lino and I was that, for starters, we've only fished together a few times, mostly in the surf here in Santa Monica, and it was very casual and not very we weren't being very methodical. It's like, I'm getting more hits on the chartreuse clouser. Oh, you better change to a chartreuse clouser or whatever. And what was also interesting was, because of the spookiness of the carp or the skittish behavior, we distanced ourselves from one another considerably. So it kind of went without saying, but I think we were trying not to spook each other's fish, and we were also trying to find the richest concentrations of fish.
Mm-hmm.
And I was actually just telling Rebecca yesterday about this, or somebody, I forget who, but the majority of that day, we were at minimum like 500 feet away from each other. And the only way we could communicate was by text or by phone.
Yeah.
So even though we were quote unquote partners, we were working really far from each other. But more importantly, we were trading tips.
Oh, sure.
And so there were 2 or 3 key tips, and one, they might go more in one direction or the other. But for example, Lino was definitely helping me with fly selection, and it turned out that there was a little bit of a preference for a certain type of fly. and it was a wacky concoction that he has that's not too different from that. I think it was like that carp coachman that you guys have.
Yeah.
If I remember the name correctly. Yeah, but so there was a dialogue about flies, and his recommendation definitely brought me into more fish. I was already getting fish, but it was helpful. And then my discovery, and I did share it with Lino, but I think at this point his fish count was already so, rocking that I don't even know if he cared what my tip was. but I noticed that, obviously the carp were kind of engaged in two things. They were either feeding or rooting around, or jousting with one another and courting for spawning. And at least that's what my deduction from the way they were behaving. And you could really tell which fish were doing what. But one of the funniest things I noticed was that sometimes when they were rooting around, they literally would have their head buried into either like a submerged bundle of like mustard flour with a little bit of like algae or moss or something, or just in a bundle of algae or whatever, and you could sneak up on them. And this was kind of funny too, because the majority of the fish I caught, I was dapping, I wasn't casting.
Yeah.
And I one of the things I noticed was that they would respond to vibration. So I would put the fly in front of them, literally dropping it on a heavy leader through the sticks.
Mm-hmm.
So it was maybe, it's crazy. It sounds so unethical and sounds so not fly fishing, but I would drop it like, 3 or 4 inches in front of their nose and literally just bounce it. And they would sense the vibration. And then I could feel that telltale like click or that inhalation, like when a largemouth bass takes a rubber worm or something. Mm-hmm. And then I would just set the hook. And because I had a heavy leader, I wasn't too worried about like being broken off because of plants and stuff and snags. And lo and behold, I would have a hook up and the fish would bolt and do a few runs. And eventually I'd fight it in and totally fair hooked, you know?
Yeah. Sounds exactly how you're supposed to do it out there. That's for sure.
I mean, it's not sexy, but it was an art. It is an art form, you know.
It is.
It was cool, and so
half of it's just being stealthy, you know.
Yeah, and that was be the heron, and if you knew you were in an area that was rich with fish, if you just stood perfectly still for 2 minutes, eventually something would cruise really close to you. It's very entertaining, man. I mean,
so fun.
I'm very curious about the ecosystem of that lake. You probably have just seen it go through so many phases, but
this is the lowest I've ever seen it. It's unbelievably low. It's crazy low, and it's almost done. I think they're almost done with the construction and stuff. So if we get a big snow year or something like that, it'll fill back up, but it's,
right.
I've never seen it this bad before. It's pretty crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now my understanding is it has a fantastic crappie population.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. World record's going to come out of there for sure.
Wow.
I'm hoping.
Wow.
So
do those landlocked salmon still exist there? Is that still being nurtured?
Yeah. So we do have those Chinook and kokanee that are in there, and they'll come up the river. They stock it. They stock the lake every year with little guys, and then they eat the shad and keep the shad population down, and then they end up coming up the river, and then it's kind of a mystery after that. The farthest I've seen them up is 3 or 4 miles upriver, and that's about it. I haven't seen them up at the Fairview Dam, but I've seen them around the first powerhouse area. We've caught them in there, but it's kind of cool. Kind of an interesting thing that goes on, for sure.
But they won't restore the Kern River rainbow with the same enthusiasm.
Exactly. It's bizarre. It's bizarre.
Back to my comment about how, the sort of picking of favorites that happens in the angling and sport fishing and fisheries world.
Yeah. We have, well, we have some interesting stuff that goes on, from a planting aspect too, like they stock the river with triploid fish, that can't reproduce.
Oh, right.
And, in preparation for the Kern River rainbow, but they'll stock Lake Isabella with producing rainbow trout. And,
oh, right.
So it's kind of, it doesn't make sense to me, but, maybe they know more than I do on that stuff, but I just don't understand it because all those fish end up coming up the river as well,
Right. Yeah. So, and I can't answer to that too much, except I did have a conversation recently with Sandy down in of Cal Trout down and other members of Cal Trout at a recent outing that was held at Malibu Creek, and one of the conversations that came up was sort of this the question of maintaining a certain genetic pedigree of a region, or of a watershed or a river, and it, much to my amazement, the stretch of Piru Creek between Lake Piru and Pyramid Lake still has trout that are of extremely high genetic integrity as far as their relation to coastal steelhead or coastal rainbow,
right?
proper native fish. And the reason, and I'm prefacing the fact that for decades that was a really heavily stocked area.
Yes. Yeah.
And sure. including the lake itself.
Yes.
Lake Piru downstream, actually, and Pyramid for that matter. But of course, there's spillway or dam or turbines or I don't know what. But
yeah.
But I guess the crux of what I'm trying to say is that the genetic integrity somehow survived despite all of these other introductions. So, I'm being optimistic here that maybe despite these fish that are capable of reproducing that are coming into the lake that are being planted might not interfere should they continue with some sort of reintroduction of the Kern River rainbow in the main river.
Well,
and sometimes I think about, sorry, real
okay.
quick, just before I forget, I think about that whole Pilot's Peak strain of Lahontan cutthroats, bringing an old strain into the original, the founding strain back into the lake, into a lake that already had other, less intact genetics, and making their mark.
Right, absolutely. So I wanted to ask you one last question, and I always ask everybody at the end of the podcast is like, what they've been listening to music-wise, and kind of talk about that a little bit. Do you have anything that you've been listening to musically, or is it a ton?
Right. It's a ton, but I can't remember anything that's really sticking out because I don't know. I'm quite frustrated with music as far as what's
out there.
Yeah, when I am seeking something out and then I suddenly can spend a whole long drive listening to one genre of music, it's I think a lot of it has been I'm gonna sort of categorize it as the music of a certain country or of a certain culture, because I want to be sort of shaken out of my own listening world. So okay, I'm going to listen to music from Thailand, or I'm going to listen to Brazilian. There's a genre Rebecca and I love called choro, which is from Brazil, and it's sort of like gypsy jazz on steroids. It's
cool.
It's the tightest, most intricate, it could be a guitar and a clarinet, and they're just shredding and riffing off of each other for a 4-minute piece of music. And by the end of that, you're ready to put all of your musical gear on Craigslist. It's just like this is
some incredible musicians
totally
out there. Huh?
yeah. And I've only been to Brazil once, but even the worst, the shadiest little back alley street musician was better than 99% of the musicians I know personally. So, I mean, a huge tip of the hat to anything Brazilian. But, and, you know, just for fun, yesterday I listened to a record that I used to love years ago, which was, and it's kind of funny to bring this one up because it's so different than what I just described. This album called Eye Against Eye by Bad Brain.
Oh,
and,
really?
You know,
Okay. Yeah.
and it's sort of, it's not the DC hardcore punk that Bad Brains is known for. It's a little bit more metal, kind of in the direction of Metallica or the Deftones.
Oh, wow.
And it was just one album, and it's so tightly arranged, it's so beautifully recorded, and it's so visceral. You know, it's one of those records where it's like, oh my gosh, I still have 100 miles to drive, and it's, you know, midnight, and I'm tired from whatever, being on the river all day. You put on this record, and you'll be home before you know it, you know. And it's like super high energy. I don't know if you'd call it angry music, but it's, you know, somebody who doesn't understand it. I mean, the lyrics are actually, some of them are quite political and proper punk rock, you know, screw the system kind of lyrics, but beautiful, beautiful band, and very different than the Brazilian stuff I just described. So, you got me talking, man.
That's awesome. Perfect. Well, Bernard, thanks so much for being on the podcast, man. Really appreciate it. And we could go on and on. I'm sure we'll have to get you on here again one of these days.
I would love it, and it always bums me out that we don't hang more. You're going to be in Ventura next week, right? You said?
I am. Let's go fish.
Yeah, and starting when again, roughly?
Wednesday through Sunday.
Okay. All right. With a little luck, we'll cross paths. And
sounds good, bud.
Thank you so much, man. We'll be in touch.
Okay, bud. Well, I'll see you on the 8th for sure.
All right. Yeah, that's going to be great.
Okay,
all right. Take it easy.
We'll talk later. Bye-bye.
Later.
All right, you guys. Thanks for listening to the podcast. I'm Guy Jeans, your host. Hope you enjoyed it. Catch you next time.